Good day, everyone. Unfortunately, I cannot join the um, Children's Literature Association annual conference, but I'm happy to be presenting online. And for my session today, I will be sharing my study entitled Trees and Stories, Perennial Characters in Selected Filipino Storybooks, Distant Spaces in Remote Learning Time. So it was really challenging for me to conduct the study because it was a time of the pandemic and it was really hard to um, coordinate with schools who would be willing to accommodate me for the study. But nonetheless, I'll be sharing my preliminary findings based on what I have done. My name is Cheeno Marlo M. Sayuno. I am an assistant professor of communication and children's literature at the Department of Humanities, University of the Philippines, Los Baños. So I'd like to first introduce to you my town, Amadeo, Cavite. Amadeo is the coffee capital of the Philippines, which means we have a lot of coffee trees in the town. And I would remember as a child, I would go home and walk through a long path of coffee trees because it was the livelihood of my grandparents back then. And there are also other kinds of trees, but coffee has been central in our community. Although unfortunately, this has dwindled over the past years. But still, we host the annual Pahinis or Thanksgiving festival. It's the coffee festival wherein we showcase overflowing coffee and colorful costumes by with performances in the community. And children are definitely among those who would participate in this event. So based on this experience, trees, I can say, are a familiar concept to Filipino children, given that they have been a great companion in such a tropic nation such as ours. Trees therefore become great characters in short stories for children because they appeal to the child readers and audience with a sense of familiarity, as if seeing a friend in the stories. So for this study, I am employing Norman Fairclough's critical discourse analysis framework in my grander study. There are 3 panels in the framework: the text, the discourse practice, and the discourse practice as a special social situation, and the everyday life as a socio-cultural practice. And this shall also guide the objectives of my study. I divided the objectives into 3 based on the layers. So for the text layer, I analyzed 11 of the many echo short stories for children produced by different publishers in the Philippines, particularly those that gave highlight on trees as characters, setting, and element in the story. Here, I looked into the various roles that the trees play in the stories. For the discourse practice level, I analyzed the discourse structures based on the short story storytelling sessions, and then the socio-cultural practice revolves around situating the experiences of children at the time of the pandemic, wherein they had to go into remote learning. Although, of course, I'm still exploring how I would go about this, and maybe insights from this conference can help me lead to what I want to do further. So let me show to you the different stories that I have analyzed. So in the stories, where did all the fireflies go? Green clothes for the yellow dragon, hugging the trees, and Elias and his trees. I saw how trees are situated in the world of humans. In these stories, the trees are inanimate creatures that humans control in many ways. In the first one, fireflies, and in hugging the trees are chopped for human consumption, and there was nothing that they can do about it. In the dragon story and in Elias, the trees were used to clothe the barren lands. However, despite the lack of movement, the role of trees in the community are acknowledged. It is because of the lack of trees that the fireflies left the city in the first storybook, and the towns in hugging the trees became flooded because the trees were cut. The growth of trees brought beauty, safety, and refuge for all life forms. Thus, The central message occurring in these stories are similar. The trees are important in survival. Trees, along with other elements in the environment, are important in ensuring that humans and animals are safe and that they have a home. So in The Last Tree, which is a post-apocalyptic story that finds a father and his daughter in search for the last source of salvation, resonates the repercussions of a dying nature, including the trees of the care and concern that it deserves. Here, the tree, while being inanimate and even lifeless, plays a big role, a beacon of hope for mankind's survival. And I also am currently I recently wrote a story also, which is entitled Si Tia Salome or Aunt Salome, which is also a story, a post-apocalyptic story that revolves around the importance of taking care of the environment. It is still, I'm still waiting for updates as to the final release of this storybook, but I'm really excited to share this, not only in the Philippines, but also maybe in the world. So The Crying Tree is another storybook which tells about the legend of the rubber tree, combines human characters and trees that are full of life. They are shown as family of trees with little trees running around the forest and the great grandfather tree becoming the protector of his children and grandchildren. Again, the humans enter and threaten the peacefulness of tree life. Still, the trees are portrayed as givers. Even if the great-grandfather tree was cut and destroyed by the loggers, the children, as they wept, gave resources to the humans in the form of latex, the tears of their pain. So the stories here among the mangroves and bakawan, bakawan is the Tagalog term, or the Filipino term, I'm sorry, for mangroves, show the abode that mangroves provide for various creatures in the water, on land, and in the air. Bakawan extends to a story on water pollution, while Here Among the Mangroves enumerates the various life forms in mangroves. Both storybooks are also provide both storybooks also provide information about mangrove preservation at the end of the books. These stories situate trees as inanimate but present figures in the narrative. The trees are the home that makes life possible for various creatures. What makes Lawan, the seed that wanted to fly, and the little seed unique is how they embody characteristics of children in the story. After all, it is through stories that portray children, whatever their form, that child readers can relate to the most. In Lawan, the first storybook here, the child seed is adventurous, always asking for questions, always searching for possibilities. Ultimately, Lawan finds his calling to become a tree standing tall in the forest, home to many creatures. In the little seed, the child becomes the reason why the Datu is able to find his heart. It is through the child that the adult learns to laugh, and love. Ang punong mainggitin, or the envious tree in English, also provides humanistic elements to the tree, with the guava tree becoming envious of how people adore the roses, the santan, and the gumamela more than him. Later on, he finds his value as the source of fruit and even for his healing benefits. It is interesting here that the tree is introduced with a fault towards self-realization of purpose. So based on these storybooks, I found several roles that trees portray. The tree is an object that can be controlled by humans, but is also the tree that protects the human from calamities. The tree is a shelter for creatures, but it can also threaten the safety of its inhabitants, especially if they are not taken care of by the people. The tree is a source of salvation, may it be in a distant future or in the here and now. The trees can be an adventurer, its seeds flying from the forest to the skies, searching for answers and interacting with the world that it is meant to protect. The tree is an imagined wonder. It is a missing piece that can present itself as the hope of the future. Evidently, in the stories, environmental conservation and protection are the most dominant themes. I think that this is really the ultimate goal in using the trees as part of the stories. In order to do so, content creators have to show not only the benefits that we get from trees, but also their vulnerability, that they cry, they get hurt, that they need hugs and care every now and then, that they have to be protected so that they can protect us too. From there, trees can have a perennial presence in the world, clothing the lands and becoming home for animals and communities that can stand the tests of time. So for the next part, in the short storytelling sessions, we found that trees are a familiar imagery among children. They can easily relate to the trees being mentioned, and at the same time, they are familiar with the names of many of these trees. Trees serve as both a place and a character for children in rural areas. So because children can be their playmates, trees can be their playmates, trees can be a place where they play with their other friends. However, for the children in the cities, trees are not as abundant because, of course, in many cities and urban areas in the Philippines, the houses are closely built against each other, and there are very limited spaces for trees. And you can see trees, for example, in parks, which is not always accessible to children. And for the case of children in the study, they really long to go out because it was some of the data gathering that I did was at the time wherein it was full remote learning. Although my data gathering was also limited because many of these schools in the Philippines would resort to offline learning through modules, self-learning modules. So it was really difficult to coordinate with institutions who are willing to accommodate me for this very exploratory project. But then children have the opportunity or the experiences of experiencing trees in a digital sense. So there are many trees in the games that they play. For example, in Minecraft, there are trees that they can chop and turn into wood, which they can use to craft other tools. In PlayerUnknown's Battleground or PUBG, there are many maps where the combats happen, and there are many trees in these locations, and the trees are helpful because it's an opportunity for children to hide when there are enemies. And even Plants vs. Zombies, which is a very common game, the plants are the ones who are the protagonists fighting the zombies. And there are many other games where trees are present. So I think this is the exposure to trees that the children are unable to experience in the real world, especially at the time when they were not allowed to go out because of the pandemic. So in relation to that, in the Philippines, we had to resort to remote learning setup. So that's my mom. She's also a public school teacher, and she has to teach online. And then some of the children, because they don't have internet connection, had to resort to self-learning modules wherein they are given materials and they answer on their own. But recently, I also included photos when there was limited face-to-face engagement. Some of the children were allowed to go to school for limited time to actually experience learning in the classroom, but this is still in the works. So what I wanted to show here is the idea that children are meant to stay at home because of the pandemic, and because of that, there was a very limited opportunity to experience what it's like to go out and play with the trees. But hopefully, as we go along the pandemic and we finally surpass that challenge, children would be able to experience living and playing with trees again. Just some implications, because as I have said, this is as a paper on the works, and I still am looking for further directions for the project. The trees tend to be regarded as automatic presence that we tend to neglect them. But even then, they carry with them various stories, no matter what role they play. They can be made to turn or run or stand tall amidst the storms, but they are always there. The stories analyzed in the study show the representation of trees in various contexts, with the central goal of helping children understand the value of environmental conservation. It is interesting that the stories also showed the past through legends, the present through experiences of children, and even the future, given the idea that children are very much exposed to technology. The future might be sometimes grim, but it's also hopeful. Children in the Philippines have an affinity towards trees, although this changes depends on um, their immediate environment. But children are also introduced to trees in a digital sense, and this might affect their meaning-making processes in terms of what nature is. In the games, they see trees and plants as helpful presents. They provide supplies, they serve as shelter and hideouts, and they even become characters with which children play. Child players can attack enemies. Thus, we can say that these exposures allow them to further develop a positive relationship with the natural world despite the limitations brought about by the pandemic and the exposure of children to technology that is growing even more and more. Still, we hope to see children who can discern the virtual from the real and to apply what they have learned in virtual modalities as they contribute in nation building in the physical environment. Let me end the presentation with the imagined image of the tree in the last tree. Here, to the father and the daughter, the tree is nothing more than a myth that no one has ever proven just yet. So here it is said, imagine long arms that spread far and wide, sharing food of various color and size, cleansing our water, refreshing our air, breathing into everyone everywhere. A giver of life, a healer of worlds, a provider for every boy and girl. Do you see now why we need the tree? As was in the old earth, in the new it shall be. True stories about trees, we do not want to come to a point where the trees are nothing more than an image from the past. We hope to see a future where trees and the forests and the waters and the creatures of the natural world are our company. And from there, things get better and better for us, as it was in the old earth and in the new earth shall it be. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope for your insights about my study, because again, this is very exploratory, and I hope to collaborate with you in the future. My name is Cheeno Marlo M. Sayuno. You can communicate with me through my email address and through my website, and I hope to see you in a face-to-face conference in the future. Thank you so much, and congratulations also to the conveners of the conference for this very successful event. Stay safe.